When HOA Karen slashed my daughter's wheelchair tires, she thought she'd get away with it until the security cameras caught her red-handed. Let's get one thing straight, I never asked to become the main character in a suburban revenge saga. I'm Mike Johnson, 50, single dad, and until recently the proud owner of the only house in Oakwood Pines that doesn't bow to the iron-fisted rule of the Homeowners Association. My 12-year-old daughter Emily and I live just outside their jurisdiction, which, as you'll soon see, is a technicality that means nothing to people like Karen Mitchell. Emily is my world. After a car accident 2 years ago left her in a wheelchair, I've made it my mission to give her every shred of independence possible. She's got more grit in her pinky than most adults have in their whole bodies. She paints, she codes, she even beat me at chess last week and hasn't let me forget it. So when the HOA led by Karen, whose idea of power is wielding a clipboard like a medieval scepter, decided to make our lives difficult, I was ready for a fight. Here's the thing about Karen, she's the kind of person who alphabetizes her spice rack and calls the city if your grass is 0.3 inches too high. She runs the HOA like a petty fiefdom, enforcing rules with the zeal of a mall cop on a Segway. The kicker? Our house isn't even under HOA control. But that didn't stop Karen from suggesting we keep our property up to community standards, her words, not mine. It started small. A passive-aggressive note about our mailbox being uncharacteristically blue. A warning about Emily's wind chimes disturbing the peace. But the real trouble began when I installed a wheelchair ramp at our front entrance. I built it myself, spending weekends sawing, hammering, and sweating so Emily could come and go without help. To me, it was a symbol of her freedom. To Karen, it was the architectural equivalent of a middle finger. She showed up on my porch one morning, sunglasses perched on her nose, HOA badge glinting in the sun, and delivered her verdict: "This ramp is an eyesore, Mr. Johnson. It clashes with the neighborhood aesthetic." She said aesthetic like she was auditioning for a reality show about home makeovers gone wrong. I explained, calmly, that the ramp was necessary for Emily's mobility and, by the way, our house wasn't subject to HOA rules. She pursed her lips so tightly I thought she might swallow her own face. That's when the letters started. Certified mail, no less, because nothing says, I mean business, like a $7.50 postage fee. The first one demanded I remove the ramp within 10 days or face daily fines. The second cited community standards and property values. The third included a photo of my ramp, annotated with red Sharpie like a deranged art critique. I kept them all in a folder labeled Karen's Greatest Hits. I tried reasoning with her, quoting the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Federal Fair Housing Act. She waved me off, insisting the HOA had discretion over visible modifications even on non-member properties. I started to wonder if she moonlighted as a Bond villain. Now, I'm not the type to back down from a fight, especially when it comes to Emily. I installed the ramp anyway, double-checking every bolt. I even put up security cameras around the house, not because I expected sabotage, but because, well, you don't spend 12 years as a single dad without learning to expect the unexpected. Which brings us to the night that changed everything. It was a Thursday, just after midnight. Emily was asleep, her wheelchair parked by the front door, ready for another day of school and sarcastic banter. I was halfway through a rerun of Wheel of Fortune, irony not lost on me, when the motion sensor pinged on my phone. I checked the camera feed and saw nothing unusual, just the usual shadows and a stray cat giving the lens the stink eye. The next morning, Emily rolled out, ready to catch the bus, and stopped cold. "Dad," she called, voice trembling. "Something's wrong." Both tires on her wheelchair were flat, slashed clean through. She looked up at me, eyes wide, and for the first time in months, I saw fear instead of determination. I felt something inside me snap. This wasn't just about a ramp or an eyesore. This was an attack on my daughter's independence, her life. And someone was going to pay. I reviewed the security footage, heart pounding. There she was, Karen Mitchell, HOA president, community watchdog, caught on high-definition camera sneaking onto our porch at 12:17 a.m., kitchen knife in hand. She crouched, glanced around, and stabbed both tires with the precision of someone who's slashed more than a few pool floats in her day. She scurried off, looking over her shoulder like she'd just robbed a lemonade stand. I stared at the screen, equal parts furious and vindicated. Karen had crossed a line, and this time, she'd left a trail of breadcrumbs straight to her own doorstep. So, what do you do when your neighbor goes full supervillain and your security cameras catch every second? You get ready for the showdown of the century. But before we get to the fireworks, let me ask you, ever had a neighbor or HOA go too far? Maybe not, slash your kid's wheelchair tires, far, but enough to make you want to install a moat and a drawbridge? Drop your stories in the comments. Misery loves company, and I could use a few laughs before the next round. Because trust me, in Oakwood Pines, the real housewives aren't just desperate, they're dangerous. And as Karen was about to learn, you don't mess with a dad on a mission. It started with a letter that pushed us too far. You'd think, after a decade of fixing engines and raising a daughter who can outcode half the neighborhood, I'd be immune to paperwork. But nothing quite prepares you for the sight of a certified envelope from the Oakwood Pines HOA, hand-delivered by Karen herself, her perfume lingering, her signature as sharp as her tongue. Inside, "Dear Mr. Johnson, your recently installed wheelchair ramp is not in compliance with community standards. It clashes with the neighborhood aesthetic and may lower property values. Please remove it within 10 days to avoid fines." I read it twice, then a third time for the punchline. There wasn't one. Emily, painting a watercolor sunset at the kitchen table, looked up. "Is it from her again?" she asked, eyebrow cocked. The kid's got instincts, probably from years of dodging Karen's passive-aggressive drive-bys. I tried to laugh it off. Apparently, our ramp is a threat to the very fabric of Oakwood Pines. Emily grinned. Maybe we should add disco lights. But the humor faded fast. The ramp wasn't just wood and screws. It was Emily's ticket to independence. And now, Karen wanted it gone because it didn't match her vision of Stepford suburbia. I did what any self-respecting dad would do, I fired up the laptop and started reading. Turns out, the law is on our side. The Americans with Disabilities Act and the Federal Fair Housing Act both say that reasonable accommodations like ramps aren't just allowed, they're protected rights, even in HOA-ruled fiefdoms. I printed out the relevant sections, highlighted the best bits, and drafted a reply. "Dear Ms. Mitchell, the ramp is a necessary accommodation for my daughter's disability, as protected by federal law. Any attempt to remove or penalize us for it is discriminatory and unlawful." I attached copies of the statutes for good measure. Emily added a smiley face sticker. We sent it certified mail, because two can play at that game. Karen's response arrived 3 days later, thicker than the last, with a new twist: failure to comply will result in daily fines of $100, and possible legal action. She even included a photo of the ramp, annotated with red Sharpie arrows pointing to offensive angles, and non-compliant color. It was less a legal document and more a deranged Pinterest critique. At this point, I decided it was time to call in reinforcements. Enter Tom Reynolds, my old friend and the only lawyer in Austin who still works for Barbecue and Gratitude. Tom reviewed the letters, sipped his coffee, and smirked. "She's got nothing. The law is clear, HOAs can't deny reasonable accommodations for disabilities, especially when you're footing the bill. If she pushes, she's the one in trouble." I felt a wave of relief, but also a flicker of anger. Why should we have to fight for something so basic? Why did Karen get to decide what counted as community standards, when the community included a 12-year-old girl who just wanted to get out the door on her own? Still, we played it by the book. I installed the ramp anyway, triple-checking every bolt. Tom sent an official letter on his firm's letterhead, reminding the HOA that their demands were not just petty, but illegal. That didn't stop Karen. She doubled down, sending more letters, each one more desperate than the last. The ramp is a visual blight. Other residents have complained. You are setting a dangerous precedent. I started a folder, Karen's Greatest Hits, Volume 2, and tucked each missive inside. Meanwhile, Emily flourished. With the ramp, she could wheel herself to the bus stop, visit friends, and paint outdoors. She even started a blog, Rolling with It Adventures in Accessibility. Her first post, My Dad vs. the Ramp Police. But the tension simmered. Neighbors whispered. Some offered quiet support, others avoided eye contact. Karen, undeterred, patrolled the street like a mall cop with a vendetta, clipboard in hand, ready to pounce on any infraction real or imagined. One evening, as Emily and I watched the sunset from the porch, she asked, "Why does she hate us so much?" I didn't have a good answer. Some people just don't like change, I said. But that's their problem, not ours. If only it were that simple. Because in Oakwood Pines, a certified letter was just the opening salvo. And Karen was just getting started. Then came the night that broke our hearts. It was one of those Texas spring evenings where the air is thick with the scent of cut grass and the distant threat of rain. Emily was finishing a painting of our neighbor's dog in a superhero cape, her idea of subtle commentary on the neighborhood's guardians. I was in the garage, tinkering with a stubborn carburetor, when I heard it, the unmistakable hiss of a tire giving up the ghost. At first, I thought it was my truck. But then Emily called out, her voice trembling. "Dad, my chair won't move." I rushed to the porch to find her stranded, eyes wide, her wheelchair listing to one side. Both tires were flat, slashed clean through. The chair, her lifeline to the world, was dead weight. For a moment, I just stood there, stunned. Emily's hands shook as she tried to will herself forward. "It's okay, Em," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "We'll fix it." But she knew. We both did. This wasn't an accident. This was a message. I carried her inside, heart pounding, anger rising like a Texas thunderstorm. Then I remembered the cameras, the ones I'd installed after Karen's last round of community improvement threats. I pulled up the footage on my phone, hands shaking. There she was. Karen Mitchell, president of the Oakwood Pines HOA, in all her midnight glory. She crept up our walkway, glancing over her shoulder like a raccoon with a guilty conscience. In her hand, a kitchen knife. She crouched by Emily's chair, glanced around, and slash took out both tires with the efficiency of someone who's ruined more than a few bake sales. I watched the video twice, just to be sure. Then a third time, to let the rage settle into something useful. Karen thought she was sneaky, but my cameras had a front row seat to her meltdown. The next morning, I called the police. The officer, Officer Ramirez, watched the footage in silence, eyebrows climbing higher with every second. "That's pretty clear," he said, which is cop speak for, "she's toast." He took my statement, filed a report for property damage and harassment, and assured me charges would be filed. Emily, ever the optimist, asked if we could get her wheelchair upgraded with off-road tires and maybe a flamethrower. I promised to look into it. But I wasn't done. I printed out stills from the footage, burned a copy to a USB, and called Tom Reynolds. "We're going to small claims court," I told him. "And I want the HOA on the hook for enabling her." Tom, bless him, was already drafting the paperwork. "They're liable, Mike. The board knew about her behavior and did nothing. With this footage, it's an open and shut case." Meanwhile, Karen doubled down on her delusions. She left another note on our door typed, this time, as if anonymity could save her, "Acts of vandalism are unfortunate, but perhaps if you'd complied with community standards, this wouldn't have happened." It was less a threat, more a confession with a side of victim blaming. I posted a screenshot from the footage on the Oakwood Pines Facebook group, captioned, "If anyone's missing a kitchen knife, HOA Karen might have it. Also, she owes my daughter new tires." The comments exploded. Some neighbors were horrified, others, finally emboldened, shared their own Karen stories. The tide was turning. But the damage was done. Emily missed 2 days of school while we waited for replacement tires. She watched from the window as other kids biked past, her independence slashed by someone who valued aesthetics over humanity. That night, as I tucked her in, she asked, "Why does she hate us so much?" I didn't have an answer. But I promised her this: we're not letting her win. Tomorrow, we fight back. Because in Oakwood Pines, you can mess with a mechanic's mailbox, you can whine about wind chimes, but you do not mess with his daughter's wheelchair and expect to get away with it. Karen's petty empire was about to meet its match. And my security cameras were ready for their close-up. In court, Karen's lies unraveled faster than her last attempt at a neighborhood bake sale. You know that feeling when you walk into a place and everyone's already picked a side? That was the vibe in small claims court the morning of our showdown. The benches were packed with Oakwood Pines residents, some curious, some nervous, a few clutching their own folders of HOA grievances like talismans against evil. Emily sat beside me, chin up, her wheelchair tires gleaming, and, thanks to Tom's insistence, reinforced with Kevlar. Karen swept in with her lawyer and her signature air of unearned authority, clutching a stack of paperwork and wearing sunglasses indoors. Pro tip: if you want to look innocent, maybe don't dress like you're hiding from TMZ. The judge, a woman who looked like she'd seen every HOA power trip in the book, called us to order. Tom opened with the security footage, projected in glorious high definition for the whole room to see. There was Karen, creeping up our path at midnight, knife in hand, committing what can only be described as the world's pettiest act of sabotage. Karen's lawyer coughed. "Your Honor, my client denies these allegations. The footage could be manipulated, or perhaps it's someone else." The judge didn't even blink. "Unless Ms. Mitchell has an evil twin, the footage begs to differ." Emily snorted, and I had to stifle a laugh. Karen, for her part, went with the classics. "That's not me," she insisted, voice rising. "I was home all night, organizing the HOA files." If by organizing files she meant starring in a late-night crime drama, she nailed it. Tom laid out the rest: the threatening letters, the ADA and Fair Housing Act violations, the HOA's refusal to intervene, and the emotional distress Karen's vendetta had caused a 12-year-old girl. He didn't need to embellish. The facts and the video spoke volumes. Karen's lawyer tried to pivot, claiming the HOA was only enforcing community standards. The judge cut him off. Community standards do not supersede federal law or basic decency. She turned to Karen. "Ms. Mitchell, your actions were not just inappropriate, they were unlawful and cruel." The verdict was swift and devastating, for Karen, at least. The HOA was ordered to pay $5,000 in damages, cover all our legal fees, and most importantly permanently drop any objections to Emily's ramp. Karen was personally fined for vandalism and ordered to issue a written apology to Emily. The judge recommended the HOA board review its leadership and policies, to prevent further embarrassment and liability. The room buzzed. Neighbors whispered. One guy in the back fist pumped. Emily squeezed my hand, her smile brighter than the courtroom lights. As we left, Karen tried one last stand. "This isn't over," she hissed. The judge, without missing a beat, replied, "For your sake, Ms. Mitchell, I sincerely hope it is." Walking out of that courtroom, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Justice wasn't just served, it was delivered with a side of poetic irony and a dash of public humiliation. And for once, the only thing Karen's community standards managed to lower was her own reputation. And just like that, the neighborhood turned against Karen. The ink on the judge's order was barely dry when the Oakwood Pines HOA board called an emergency meeting minus one self-important president. Karen, once the iron-fisted queen of community standards, was now the pariah of the cul-de-sac. Word spread faster than free donuts at a board meeting: the ramp stays, the damages are paid, and Karen's resignation is not so much requested as demanded. Neighbors who'd once crossed the street to avoid our non-compliant mailbox now crossed it to shake my hand. Some brought apology casseroles, others brought stories. Turns out, Karen's reign of clipboard terror had left more than a few scars. One neighbor, Mrs. Patel, confessed she'd been fined for overly enthusiastic daffodils. Another, the Millers, revealed Karen once threatened to write up their toddler for excessive sidewalk chalk. The HOA's defeated regime was suddenly on the receiving end of its own community standards. The board, eager to save face, dropped all objections to Emily's ramp and issued a public apology. Karen's name was scrubbed from the HOA newsletter faster than you can say, unlawful and cruel. She faded into obscurity, her only legacy a cautionary tale about what happens when you pick a fight with a mechanic, his daughter, and a well-placed security camera. But the real victory wasn't the check or the apology. It was the Saturday after the verdict, when Emily and I hosted our first ever Rolling Forward community picnic. The ramp was festooned with streamers, Emily's artwork hung from every tree, and the neighborhood kids raced wheelchairs in the driveway, with Emily as the undisputed champion. Even Tom showed up, barbecue in hand, declaring it the best legal victory party this side of the courthouse. As the sun set, Mrs. Patel raised a toast to Mike and Emily for showing us what real community looks like. Someone else quipped, Karen's community standards didn't survive the security footage, did they? Laughter rippled through the crowd, the kind that only comes when a storm has passed. I looked at Emily, beaming in the golden light, and felt something I hadn't in a long time, peace. We'd stood up, fought back, and won not just for us, but for everyone tired of being bullied by petty tyrants in polo shirts. So, if you loved this story of justice over HOA tyranny, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more tales of triumph. And remember, when someone tries to take away your ramp, your rights, or your daughter's independence, make sure your security cameras are rolling and your community is watching. Because sometimes, the best revenge is just living free, rolling forward, and throwing one hell of a picnic.